right, so welcome everybody to Med Mentors choosing which schools to apply to. I think they have a better name for it. Where to apply panel. I'm Sophie, I'm an MS1 and I'll be moderating today's panel, and I'll let the wonderful panelists introduce themselves. Rog, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Rog. I'm in the MD PhD program at UCLA, and I'm currently a first-year PhD student. So that means I'm, functionally a third year. And what should I include? Like where I'm from?
Sure, where you're from, maybe favorite animal, or I don't know. And then
Yeah. Sure. So I'm from New York. I grew up there. I went to high school there and college there. So LA is a big change for me.
I can go next. Hi everyone, I'm Vishnu, third year medical student in the Geffen MD program. From San Jose, went to Berkeley for undergrad. And yeah, looking forward to answering any questions that you guys have.
Van, do you want to go next? I saw a big.
I'm also from San Jose. Hi, y'all. My name is Van, like the car or the shoe. Born and raised in San Jose. Also went to Cal, go Bears. I'm MS1 in the traditional MD program, and it took 4 gap years, 3.5 to 4 gap years. So I'm excited to be here.
Randy?
Yeah, hi y'all. My name's Randy. I am a MS1, so a first year medical student in the traditional David Geffen School of Medicine program here at UCLA. Originally from Taiwan, but immigrated to the San Jose area, and then went to school in UC San Diego. Spent the last 8 years there, so it took about 3 gap years before starting school here.
Hi everyone, I'm Nonye. I am currently in MS 3.5, and that's because I'm in the Prime Drew program. So I'm currently taking leave of absence this year to do my MPH out at Harvard, which is where I am right now. But I'm originally from SoCal, like an hour east of UCLA. I went to MIT for undergrad, and I went straight through, and I'm here now. So yeah, nice to be here with you guys.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. So I guess the first kind of theme for today is kind of how did you guys choose where to apply? What factors did you consider when deciding where to apply, and how did you prioritize those factors?
I can probably start and share my thoughts. I think I went about it really systematically. So I bought the MSARS, the medical school application. I don't know what the last letter stands for, but it has all of the information about every medical school, and it classifies it by urban versus rural and what their grading system is, and what their letters of recommendation requirements are, what their tuition is like, and all of those other factors. And so I kind of made a spreadsheet, and then went through all the California schools first because I was particular on staying in California if possible, and then went through other schools in other parts of the country, and then just kind of took down information on all of the characteristics that were important for me. And then from there made a final tab of all of the schools that I was going to apply to. And that came out to around 28 to 30 or so schools that I felt, were schools that had a good mix of reach schools, schools that were more where I stood in terms of stats and applications, and then a couple of schools that I considered to be a little bit more safety. And so that was kind of how I went about things. I think in terms of numbers, I want to say it was an even split or so of 5 to 10 reach schools, 10 to 15 schools that I felt I was more matched for, and then a handful of safety schools.
I think I can go. So I think for the MD PhD, it's a little bit different. So just a different perspective. I don't know if anyone's really interested in MD PhD, but I applied to around 30 schools, 32 schools, because I went straight through. So I was just like, I want to get into medical school, so I will apply to basically every school that I can reasonably go to, I could see myself going to, and that meant schools that were in urban areas and on the coasts and in big cities. And that was kind of it. Yeah, and I just went for it, and I think that's a legitimate strategy. If you just want to go to medical school, just apply everywhere, and that's what I did. Worked out for me. I got a lot of offers. I actually got to negotiate some stuff, so it was pretty reasonable. I mean, it was a lot of essays though.
Yeah, I can go. I just want to echo what Rog said about just where you can actually envision yourself. Like, I really think it's important that while you really do want to go to med school, you truly don't want to apply anywhere that you like feel like you would say no to, or you would be like truly unhappy not being at. Whether that was for me, like Vanderbilt, great school, knew I wasn't trying to be in Tennessee. Honestly, with what's going on there, clearly made the right choice, like not trying to go to Tennessee. But I still was open to like some other places. Like I applied to Morehouse in Atlanta, and it was like, I've never really been to the South, but I knew that like Atlanta might be one of those cities I could like do that in. So in addition to applying to California, because that's where I was from, applying to schools in Massachusetts, that's where I was going to school, I kind of tried to think about similarly like cities I wanted to live in, but also places I could really see myself, and maybe places that I wouldn't have necessarily thought about. But when you look at the MSAR, you look at MCAT and GPA, I kind of tried to make sure that most schools I either fit their GPA or I fit their MCAT. I feel like it was rare that I actually fit both. And I think that some other students might find that to be true as well, where my GPA wasn't the highest. I think I had like a 3.2. So it was hard to match that sometimes with my MCAT score, which is a little bit better. So I think just if a school fit your MCAT, cool. If it fits your GPA, cool. I really do think it's about like mission. I don't know how many people really do go through and like read kind of more about the school, trying to figure out whether or not they have like programs you like, so you can like write about them in your secondaries and try to actually figure out if you can show them how you're a match beyond your scores. I think is really important as well. And because I was interested in doing an MD master's, that was something that I considered as well when I was looking at schools, like places that I could do that with it, either in 4 years or in 5.
And also using the MSAR, absolutely recommend it for everyone. I have a master document that I've pulled up of when I was applying to medical school. I applied at 36 because 3 plus 6 is 9, and the 9 is a lucky number in Asian culture. So I was like, all right, that's going to maximize my chances of getting in. I do have a column or a couple of columns that highlight the different GPAs and MCAT scores. A couple of schools I applied to because I was like, I am completely out of the range for these schools. But one of them was Hopkins, and my partner lives in Maryland. So I was like, I'll apply and we'll just see what happens. And I didn't get in. But it was really interesting for me to set this process out for myself because my imposter syndrome was very clear in the process. I felt all the numbers, and knowing that that's not the only thing to look at. Nunya mentioned the missions of the schools, and that's something I really valued, but I was worried that even if I aligned with the mission significantly, that I wasn't sure if I'd get in despite aligning with what I really wanted to have in medical school. And so that's part of the reason why I applied to as many as I did, is I wasn't sure if I would get in. And I remember for the longest time saying that I'm just going to go to wherever I get into. And I was able to get into more than one school. But by the time that I was interviewing for some of the schools that I didn't want to or knew I wasn't going to attend, it was only then after I'd gotten more than one offer that I was like, oh, I have an option. Whereas earlier in the process, I had no way of knowing whether or not I would have that option. And so if it come down to getting that one offer, then that was going to be where I was going to go. So it's got a little bit on how I decided where to go is significantly, and unfortunately to start, it was going to start with the stats. And I hated that was the case, but it was what it was at the end of the day for me.
I think the other thing I'd also add is like, I'm looking at my spreadsheet that I'd made too, and I had like tabulated what the percentiles were in terms of what was the average MCAT of an accepted student and what was the 75th, the 90th, the 25th, the 10th, because they have those all, evened out. And like, honestly, like many of these people with scores and GPAs across that range all got accepted. So I feel like, looking too closely at that and using it as like a make or break factor, I later realized was not as helpful. And I certainly agree that that can be a good first step in terms of screening in or screening out schools. But after that point, if you feel like you align well with the mission or you really like the school, like those numbers are ultimately just statistics, and people who fall way on either range have been accepted. And so, statistics are helpful, but not always perfect.
Thank you. You guys answered basically all of them. Randy, do you have anything to add?
No, I was just going to say that just to add a little bit on, I really enjoy how everyone sort of had a different approach to sort of how to create that school list and really look into schools that they wanted to apply to. Me personally, I remember not having necessarily the best sort of statistics sort of going into it. And I know, looking at the MSAR, it can be a little bit depressing, to be totally honest. You try to look into all the different averages of what students have to get accepted into all these different schools. And for me, it honestly, truthfully, just wasn't helpful at all because I didn't fit into sort of any of those averages. And so my sort of alternative approach to that was just sort of looking within my own circles, my own network of people that I sort of knew, friends of friends, siblings of friends who sort of attended medical school, and sort of reaching out to them to sort of hear what school was like from their viewpoint, and then trying to see if I could sort of see myself, envisioning myself sort of living in those places too and going through med school in their shoes. And then sort of going back into MSAR to look more specifically into those schools, just for a little bit more detail. I think that was just, a slightly different approach that might take a little bit more work, but I know that it was a little bit more helpful for me just because the approach of going through the MSAR and looking at statistics just didn't work for me because I didn't really fit in any of those boats.
It's a very good point, kind of a tag along. There's a very good question in the Q&A that's kind of focusing more on like a certain aspect of the application. So like, what if your application, isn't as strong in research, for instance, as is the example in the Q&A? How can you kind of parse out how big of a part of the mission of the school or the focus of the school that is through MSAR or through other avenues that could be more effective? Randy, I hadn't thought of that option of just reaching out to my network, but that's a very good one. Any other insights would be helpful.
I'm probably the worst person to answer this, but I mean, I usually think you can tell a school's research focus based on its emphasis on like how much of clinical care they try to talk about versus like how much they care about like, oh, we have like very impactful research or NIH funding or stuff. And I know if you look at the US News rankings, there's like two rankings: research ranking, primary care ranking. Look at the primary care ranking, you're looking at those schools are generally going to have, as a distribution, more emphasis on clinical care. Look for schools that have some sort of program where they're like sending people into the community. Like I know Columbia has one of those where they have some exchange program where they do like 2 years in rural primary care. So I would recommend that, but I don't know too much more.
I think the other thing I would say is that when you like look at these rankings, and I had a column on my spreadsheet about the research ranking and the primary care ranking as well, because like you certainly are like drawn to anything that's numbers oriented to help you narrow down your decision, but then like a lot of that isn't materially relevant to like our journey as medical students. Like UCLA is ranked pretty high for NIH funding, but like I don't know that specifically influences the trajectory that you're taking as a medical student, nor does it mean that like that means projects are going to be easily accessible to you as a medical student. Like you can certainly find good mentors, anywhere, and you certainly will have that accessible to you. So like, I think like others have said, using your network and trying to see like, what are the opportunities that you have to do research or, other things, community service, outreach, with the curriculum that they have. And I think you'll get a good idea when talking to current students, like how much time the curriculum actually allocates for them to like explore those things. And I feel like that will give you a good idea of where the priorities lie.
sorry, I just wanted to piggyback off that really quickly, just like this idea of talking to current students or also like going to like medical school fairs, if that's like an opportunity, and speaking just to staff and faculty that end up coming to those as well. Like, I think it gives you a good idea of like the culture of that school and whether or not research is a big focus or community service or whatever it is. And I think might actually open your mind to some schools who maybe you weren't thinking about applying to, but like when you meet them, you get a better vibe in person for like what they value in their students and the type of students that end up going to their school. So.
Yeah, and one last question that I think really fits in well from Tal. As medical students, what are you finding that is particularly helpful for your success and well-being, and what factors should we consider that might not be so obvious?
One answer out of many potential answers is I'm really appreciative that UCLA, among many other med schools, has a pass later curriculum. But I think that creates for a culture where we're not competing, or I don't feel like I'm competing with my classmates. It's super collaborative. We take notes together and then we do assignments together. So that's something that I personally really enjoy. I declined to apply to any school that didn't have no pass or pass later curriculum.
I think the other thing is also that UCLA also has like a pass-fail grading curriculum for the clerkship years as well. So when you're doing your clinical rotations, whereas I think in many places across the country, I think it's become standard for the first 2 years, the preclinical to be pass-fail. But I think more and more schools are starting to move towards removing grades for the clerkship curriculum as well. But that's also, I think, a huge bonus for wellness, because you're not, feeling like you're obligated to stay longer than you need to like, impress somebody because you're not being graded explicitly. And so, there's more opportunity for your wellness. You don't feel like you're competing with other medical students on the service. So I think that like what that does for team dynamics is really like important. So I feel like in that sense, like that's something that I didn't pay too much attention to at all, but that's actually been a huge thing for wellness too.
I think like a couple things come to mind. I feel like one thing also is that like I'm in a different curriculum than currently. I had a different preclinical curriculum than the MS1s and MS2s do here. But I really do think like the way anatomy is structured is kind of important and not really talked about everywhere. There are places where you get to dissect, and there's places where parts of it are already dissected for you and you just kind of come in and identify things. I do think that UCLA has opportunities in your second and third year to dissect, but the fact that our bodies are already prosected before we come in, I think is like very useful in not wasting time and actually learning the material and not focusing on messing up things while you dissect. Another thing is like, what support services does your school have? Like whether that's like, we have really good anatomy tutoring, we have really great lecture tutoring, we have lots of opportunities to get free shelf exams for our third year exams, as well as there's like a really good academic like office, that academic affairs office that helps with just like financial things, whether it's like getting resources and things like that. And I feel like that's something to think about, like how is it structured, how students get help, and how people are saying about pass later. Also kind of asking a little bit more questions about what does pass later mean? When do you take those tests again? What happens next? And things like that are really important, because I feel like we hear pass fail and we just kind of take that at face value, but it means different things to different schools. And I think the other thing that people don't really talk about as much is just like clinical sites, in the sense that like I know we have a lot of them, which is great, diverse places to go, but we have to drive quite a bit to get to all of those places, and parking and gas is not always, well, parking is not always paid for, obviously gas is always a thing. And I don't know, I think that's something to think about just beyond UCLA as well, just like what does clinical sites look like, how do you get there, and things like that.
Awesome. Those were all very, very good points that I also have learned to appreciate since starting school. Another question that, another kind of topic that we wanted to kind of address on this talk is, great, you picked your schools. How do you express interest? So how, like during your application, how can you show that you're really invested in this school? how do you go about preparing school-specific essays?
So in terms of like school specific essays, like I think certainly like looking through the school's website and their curriculums is helpful. If I'm being very honest, everything sort of just molded together when I was looking through like doing all the secondaries, because it's like you don't really understand the curriculum fully until you're going through it. So I think, it's very easy to look at a website and say, everything looks great, or every school looks great, because every school has theoretically a similar mission of like combining patient care, research, education. So I think looking through the school's website is certainly helpful. I think also like if you know of a faculty member in that school that you want to do research with, or like of specific initiatives that the school offers that you learned about during, like by talking with current students, I think that can be helpful. So I think specificity will certainly help you stand out, like showing that you're familiar with like sorts of activities that medical students can engage in, and link it to an existing activity that you've done and show that you could like easily transition into those roles. I think the second part was like, how do you, like, were they asking how you show interest during the interview process?
I think that we can build off of that in another question. I think it was just particularly in the essays to start.
Okay.
Any other insights? I would just add one more thing. Connecting with current students is also a really helpful trick, because if you're talking to students, they'll probably be able to link you to current active orgs, versus sometimes school websites aren't up to date. So you'll be expressing interest about a program that has been discontinued during COVID, which happened to me a couple of times. So I would just recommend, looking either on LinkedIn or even asking admissions to see if you can connect with current students. That can also be a very good vibe check. Some schools will tell you that you can't communicate with current students until interviews. Other schools will be very forthcoming about providing students that they're happy to connect you with. So that's another tip. And then I guess kind of building off of that, great, you got an interview. So how can you express direct interest during the interview?
So I know that there are like some schools that like may want you to send like thank you notes to your interviewers like after you interview, or things like that. I personally didn't do that. Like when I interviewed at UCLA, there were other schools, like when I interviewed at UCSF, they explicitly banned thank you notes, and they said, we don't want you to send thank you notes to your interviewers. Completely not necessary. Like, let's not make the process more stressful than it needs to be. So I would say, I mean, I would just go there and be yourself. I don't think that you necessarily need to like explicitly take extra steps to send extra emails or do anything beyond that after you interview. I think that after the application process kind of nears to a close, like if you're still waiting to hear back from a school, or if you were waitlisted, then at that point, I know people that have sent like letters of intent or follow up or updates to their application. Like, let's just say you had a paper under review when you interviewed, and then you still haven't heard back from the school. So, and then it gets accepted, like you can send updates. And I think you can do that through like the portal for the school. So that's certainly like nice, like over the course of the cycle, but right when you interview, I don't know that you explicitly need to like send extra emails or extra thank you notes or things like that.
Yeah, I think what I did was I sent letter of updates, like he like what has been said, right? Like I had a paper published, I sent an update, and anything major really, anything to justify getting back in touch with the school, reminding them I exist. I actually sent quite a few. I sent, I think, 2 or 3. I don't know, maybe that's excessive. That was just me. And then, yeah, the letter of intent is very controversial. Some schools don't really care because they've been burned before or something. I did send one actually, and it worked really well for me. But your mileage may vary. I think it's very important if you do it that you only send to one school, because I'm sure there's some sort of, they're talking to each other and
doing some sort of breaking antitrust law or something, but they are probably talking to each other, and medicine's a very small world, and you will probably run into those people again. I did send thank you notes to everyone. I know some schools don't say you can or can't, so I just always stick to the safe side as I always send stuff. And it's just an opportunity for me to get back in touch with the interviewer and show interest, or if the interviewer really liked me and wants to talk further, I'm happy to do that. So I just try to do as many things as possible to have points of contact with the school. And another thing I forgot to mention before was, I don't know if UCLA does this, but I went to Columbia for undergrad, and they gave us a spreadsheet of every Columbia graduate at every medical school and their contact information. And I literally went through and I called all of them, and I said, hey, not called, but emailed and called, can you talk to me about your school, blah, blah, blah. And so that way, when I was interviewing, I was able to give more specific answers about what I liked about that school. For example, UCLA, I know you're having this, multi-million-dollar investment into this cancer, and I'm very interested in this because of my research, XYZ, understanding what the, where the money's going, what the focus is, and focusing on that, I think is a good way to show that you're really smart and you understand, at a higher level what the school's priorities are.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and also add, also for interview a day itself, really be present. I know that it can be very, very easy, especially in this era of just Zoom interviews and virtual interviews, and they are long. They're, some of them literally go from 6 a.m. in the morning until 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and you have to sit there for the whole thing. I know it could be very tempting and very easy to sort of get distracted by other things that are on your screen, or, get preoccupied with other things there too. But I will say, as someone who sort of sits on the other side of that now, having joined into some of these, not interviews, but just like casual hangout sessions with incoming students, it is very, very obvious when people are preoccupied. And so really for those interview days, just wholeheartedly just sit there, be ready to learn, be ready to ask questions, and then also just be ready to be yourself. I think that's a very big thing that was sort of touched upon by other folks here. And as much as you could sort of get to know about school, I think is also helpful. Looking back, I think a lot of my interviewers really appreciated that I wasn't just thinking about being a student at the school, but also being someone who has to live in a new, possibly area of the country. A lot of schools that I interviewed at were places that I'd never sort of lived in before, I'd never visited before, but I'd sort of taken the time to talk to folks who lived in those areas, and sort of ask them, how do you even, how do you do winter in the Midwest, and how do you adapt to all these different things if you're someone from California or someone from a hot country like Taiwan who's never seen snow in his life. And so I just asked a lot of those questions. And even for my faculty interviewers, I would ask them, hey, how's living in this area? How do you like it here? What are the things you enjoy? What are things that are a little bit difficult for you? And especially for folks that sort of transplanted to an area, I took that opportunity to sort of ask them, how can I best sort of transition to that area too? I think folks really appreciate that, because it sort of showed that you took the next step of not just thinking what the medical school is like, but also what life is going to be like for you there. Because realistically, you'll be living there for at least 4 years. And that part's, I think, is sometimes neglected by medical students who are looking to apply to schools.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit in terms of my thought process for it. If I was interviewing somewhere that did multiple mini interviews, I didn't send thank you notes. It didn't really, I don't feel like, for me, I felt like I was only going to send a thank you note if I connected with my interviewer. And I don't think in those 6 to 8 minute interactions that you really got the opportunity to do that. So I feel like I mainly sent thank you notes to people who I had 20 to 30 minute interviews with. Sometimes there were some schools who had an hour long interview with someone, but I feel like in those settings, you usually connect deeply enough, and you've learned a lot about the interviewer as well as you, as they have learned about you. And I think a lot of them appreciate it in that setting. And then obviously, yeah, if they say don't send, I wouldn't send. I think I didn't send any letter of intent. I only sent one letter of interest, and that was to Mayo. And that's just because I feel like historically Mayo enjoys receiving those letters. Whereas other schools are not quite as forthcoming about whether or not they like them. And then yeah, I agree with what people said about like during the interview being very like engaging, and like whether that's engaged with the interview, but also like I think people really like to see that you've thought about like how are you going to be like a medical student, knowing that things are going to be new, different, and that you're going to have to adapt, and that you've actually thought about what that means, regardless if it's their medical school or any medical school. Because sometimes there's not that much opportunity for you to like say why UCLA. It's more just like, why are you ready to take this next step?
Yeah. Another strategy that I used, even if they didn't ask me why a particular school, is that when I was answering about previous activities, I would make sure to include qualities that aligned with the school that I was applying to. So like I went to a big public institution for undergrad. So I made sure to mention that, on my UCLA interview, that I really enjoyed mentoring other undergrads and kind of the big population and interchange of ideas. Even though I never was asked that. And it was just a way to like intermingle those things so that it's peppered throughout the interview, but you don't have to be incredibly blatant about it, even if they didn't ask. But I will take tips from all of you guys. Those were really good answers. Let me just quickly look. What are some good questions to ask schools to evaluate whether you're a good fit there is another question that I think is good.
Something that I asked whether or not schools had a student group for specifically White Coats for Black Lives. I think that was my proxy for understanding whether or not the student culture was aligned towards social justice and equity. I didn't want to hear admin talking about the different equity groups that they have. I wanted to know a little bit more about what the student culture was like, and that was how I figured it out. It also saw that White Coats for Black Lives would post report cards of the different schools. So I referenced that to see what kind of work the institution was doing to get a better idea about whether or not I'd be a good fit there. So if I had the opportunity, then I would ask that of students. And if I didn't get that opportunity, then I would look to see if it was listed as a school that was associated with White Coats for Black Lives.
I think for me, my favorite question to ask people is like, what's their most favorite thing about the institution or least favorite thing about the institution? I think it always gave me a good idea of like their specific challenges and maybe how I would maybe have that or not have that, but also like what they really enjoyed about the school in order to like kind of assess the fit or whatnot. But yeah, I think it was also really important for me I was really interested in engineering and like device work and stuff like that. So I would always ask something about that too, like how often students get the opportunity to participate in stuff like that, or are there specific student orgs that do that work and things like that as well. I think because I was applying to Prime and Drew, the like social justice equity part of things was like usually covered in some way during our interview in the spaces that we were interacting in. But I think especially for the traditional Geffen program, what Van said is like really, really important to ask at like all of these institutions, just to kind of get an idea of like what are they doing right now, and how are students responding to it.
I think similar along the lines of what Van sort of mentioned earlier. I was very interested in social justice and advocacy, and sort of applying at the tail end of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. I always ask schools, what are some initiatives that your school and specifically your medical students sort of took to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic? I really wanted a better understanding of how much the school sort of supported the interests of its students. And I also wanted to get a better understanding of how vested the medical students in the school were in the community that they were situated in. I believe wholeheartedly that schools serve the community that they're sort of at. And so I wanted a good gauge of how invested schools were in their community.
Okay, cool. So those are all very good questions. And I think that the key point of it is to pick a value that is really important to you and figure out a way to ask clearly the question in a way that admin can't give you a proxy answer, which can be very easy to do. So I guess another question that kind of builds off of this idea of getting kind of the insight of the students and other people who have attended the school is, how important is it to connect with current students or alumni at a particular school? What are some ways you can do this, and how can you leverage these connections to get a better idea of what the school is like?
Yeah, so I mean, I went to Berkeley, and Berkeley does nothing like what Columbia did. So kudos to Columbia for being very supportive. I mean, I still think that, like, you know, my network had a lot of people that had, like, you know, gone to either UCLA or had gone to other like similar medical schools. And so like I was fortunate to have like people to help review personal statements or give me thoughts on the school and how their experience was. I certainly think that like talking to people prior to interviewing can be really helpful to help give you specifics on like what the school's mission is like, what sorts of activities the students there are pursuing, like what is it like to live in the city where the school is located. In terms of like tips for better leveraging those connections, like I don't know if our like class rosters are posted online, but like, you know, it's one thing if you go to like a large public university like, you know, the UC Berkeley or UCLA, where I think they send a lot of people to these schools. But like if you go to a smaller university, like if the class roster is made public, like you can also look at like where people, you know, went to undergrad and then like try to contact them. I don't know if like I don't know if that information is public, but like the other thing is prior to like our second look as well, I think we have a spreadsheet of med students that like are interested in talking to prospective students, and they give all of their contact information. And like usually it's pretty informal, so you can easily connect with somebody who has like a similar background to you and like get their thoughts if they had to move across the country or if they went to like a smaller school. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, just add on to be creative about how you sort of reach out. I had reached out to admissions before, and as Sophie sort of mentioned earlier, some admissions committees sort of just mentioned that, you know, I can't really connect to anyone until you're accepted. And that's a little bit hard to sort of figure out more about schools, specifically because I had a sort of unique situation where I didn't really fit into like sort of the traditional applicant setup. And so I just had to be a little bit creative. I'm not saying that medical students are the best at keeping up to date with LinkedIn, but I sort of came from a field that used LinkedIn a lot. And so I used LinkedIn to reach out to some medical students. I used it to reach out to faculty, to physicians who sort of worked in as faculty members, and sort of asked, hey, like, you know, do you have anyone that you could sort of connect me with? And actually, a lot of times physicians were either working with different medical students on research projects or the like, and they sort of connected me with them. I also reached out to a lot of different Instagram pages. So I'd reached out to like the residency Instagram page, like the family med interest group residency page or something like that. A lot of times the residents were a little bit more helpful in terms of being able to connect me with current students that I could sort of talk to and sort of get this invaluable insight into how schools operated and what the student experience was actually like at each of these schools.
Yeah, on this topic, I find this topic to be kind of hard just because I'm not sure that talking to current students like through email and like text was all that helpful, because I just find that like if you don't know someone on a personal level, not everyone, like I'm gonna be straight up with most people, but like not everyone's gonna be as straight up as they can be. And like teach their own, like you don't know who I am, you don't know where like what you say is gonna go. So like some people are kind of guarded. So I don't know if you always get the like full truth about a school by just like reaching stuff out by email or text or something like that. I did med school applications in person, so I very much found it very important to go to any of the like pre-interview events that were held. I think that like those moments, like even if it meant like having to fly in a day earlier and you didn't really want to and it didn't work with your schedule, like making that work was really important, because that's when you really got to have those real conversations. I think when you're face to face, you can like vibe a little bit better and people feel a little more open talking to you about things that maybe they don't love about their school, in addition to things that they do. And I also think that second look, which I know we might talk about a little bit, was the most important thing for me, just because I found that talking to the students who are also admitted with me was the most important thing, because those are the people who are going to be your classmates. And that is like, at least as much as what you see of the culture is really going to be defined by your classmates, because especially in curriculums where like second years go straight into the hospital, you're not going to see them. They don't really impact your day-to-day life nearly as much as your classmates do. And in schools where you do have first and second years as preclinical as both of those years do. So I really think that paying attention to the people who you're admitted with tells a lot about the school as well.
Those are all really good points. Just so that I don't miss any of the RSVP questions, there's quite a few about in-state versus out-of-state versus being in California and having like a lot of schools, but not knowing exactly how many schools to apply to. If you guys have any tips or insights in terms of navigating this whole public in-state versus out-of-state kind of balance, it would be very much appreciated.
I just want to say one thing. I feel like it's a bit of a crapshoot. I'm from the Inland Empire, and our like closest UC is UC Riverside. And everyone was like, "That's a safety school. You'll be chilling. You'll be fine." And no, I didn't even get an interview. Like, did not talk to me. UCSF was supposed to be such this like reach, and they were like one of the first interviews that I got. And when you listen to like the dean talk about how they think about the out-of-state versus in-state thing, is like they have no issues with admitting out-of-state students. Like they said that it's almost like 50-50 some years, but it's really about getting out of students to come. And then that's kind of where like the divide starts to shift, like, 70 to 80 to 20 to 30% like in-state versus out-of-state. So I think as an out-of-state applicant to especially some of the UCs that are like UCLA, UCSF, UCSD, who at least I feel like recent years have been less state focused, are like open to out-of-state applicants. It's just a matter of like whether or not they actually decide to come. And I almost feel like sometimes it's harder as in-state applicants because there's so many of us from California coming from all of these UCs that are trying to go to these places, and they are trying to like diversify that a little bit as well. I do think though that like UC Riverside, for sure, maybe even UCI is a little bit more California like bias, just because they have a little bit more of like their county and the people from that area like bias, I feel like. So that's just something to keep in mind. But like because I know someone in the Q&A talked about how they only have one home school in their state, and like I like schools see that and they know that when you're applying other things, and they keep that in mind, you know what I mean? Like they take into consideration that like if you're from Idaho, technically your home state is like University of Washington Med School, and there's like no med school in like Idaho, Montana, like, or like, and a bunch of other schools like Montana, other things. So it's like they keep that in mind, and like California is not like the end all be all. A lot of people want to come here, but we also have a lot of med schools. So like,
What I've seen is that it comes up a lot in residency applications where you might express why you want to do residency in a certain location, and some of those factors might be that you eventually want to settle there, you have a personal tie, like it's home for you, or any number of reasons why you might want to be there. I think that a similar process can be applied to any of the medical schools that you're applying to. Is when discussing why you want to be at that medical school, it might be that you specifically want to be trained in this area because of whatever reason that is. And so when it comes to being out of state for any reason, for Maryland, I could have definitely told them that my partner is living there and that I hope that I'm convinced that's my life partner. So I don't want for us to be long distance the way we currently are. And so for any of those reasons that you might have about why you might want to attend a school that might be outside of your state, you might be able to find those reasons for whatever they may be.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also add that if you're applying to like MD PhD programs specifically that are federally funded, that are called MSTPs, they are there is no in-state preference, out-of-state preference, because it's federal dollars. So you cannot show any sort of preference. Yeah, and some states just have more preference than others. I think I'm from New York, so SUNY is my local system, and they have a preference, but they're just happy that people are applying. And UC definitely has way more of a preference. I've seen. Seems like from people I saw applying from New York, it was much harder to get in for my cohort. Yeah, I mean, I think some states are just different than others. I think if you want to get a perspective on it, I would look at rosters if they're available, but also, just look at Reddit or SDN or stuff, and you'll kind of see like what the vibes are for certain schools. Like I think it was, if I remember when I was applying like WWAMI, those schools are very exclusive to that area, and they only like taking their kids, whereas other states are more open. So, just look around.
I just want to go ahead, Noni.
I just want to say one thing about like private versus public, and that ends up mattering a lot too, because private schools don't typically tend to care about in-state versus out-of-state, but that's not always true, because University of Michigan is a public school and they absolutely don't really care about in-state versus out-of-state.
Randy, you were about to say something.
No, Noni, I took it straight out of my mouth. Yeah, if you're having a hard time sort of getting started with figuring out like in-state versus out-of-state preference, I know it could be very overwhelming. Private schools are a good place to sort of start. Most private schools don't really have a preference for in-state or out-of-state students. And the other thing that I also want to mention is, Noni also mentioned this earlier, it really is a crapshoot. I think it's important to sort of emphasize that it's a preference, not a rule. So if you really think that, you could see yourself in that place, you really fit with that school's mission, and that, that's where you want to be, I'd say give it a shot. Prior to sort of UCLA grabbing me off the wait list, I was only accepted at out-of-state schools, and a lot of these out-of-state schools were the ones on the internet where people sort of say there's no way someone from out-of-state could possibly get into those schools. And so just really shoot your shot at the ones that you can sort of see yourself being at, and the process will sort of work itself out.
Wonderful. As we're kind of nearing the end here at 7:50, I just want to remind all the attendees, plug in your questions in the Q&A. The last thing I want to ask you guys is, do you have anything that you would kind of, or any insights that you would like to share with prospective applicants to medical school that weren't covered today that you think should be covered and mentioned? And this is your time to share those, just to make sure we don't miss anything.
I would say for me, the main thing when going through the application process is like, you fill out the primary and then you wait a few weeks, you start filling out the secondaries, and then like it feels like that for me, I thought was the toughest part until I had to go through the waiting game of like waiting from August to like, I'd gotten acceptance starting in October, so it wasn't even like a terribly long period of time, but like it felt really agonizing to have to think about like constantly updating your Gmail in the middle of work and just like constantly refreshing. And like my advice would be, find like a hobby that you're really invested in, that you can help take your mind off things, because that's going to set you up for like also wellness and self-care in medical school as well. So just once you're done like writing the essays and like sending them off, like find a way to keep yourself occupied and like take care of your health, and then like use that as the opportunity to like find a hobby. Because I think that it's very easy, I know that Reddit, SDN can be helpful in like learning more about schools. I also feel like you can go down a rabbit hole with those sites, and so like just keep boundaries for yourself and like make sure to also prioritize your wellness, because truly once the applications are sent out, like it is out of your control. You're waiting on somebody else to send whatever may come your way, and so prioritize your wellness as much as you can.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And on that note, I also, I didn't go to school that had a lot of pre-meds, but I know how easy it is to like just talk to only pre-meds and then get like just so much in your head about everything that's going on. So just like really, have some non-pre-med friends to lean on in terms of like people who are gonna let you vent, because you're gonna vent, you're gonna complain about something they literally do not care about. But as long as they're willing to listen to you vent about that and be like, hey, this doesn't seem that bad. I think it's always great to have people who are not in that neuroticism help you come out of it. I think another thing that we didn't really talk a lot about, but like schools that have certain like tuition benefits or scholarships that are like particularly good is something to keep in mind. Like NYU free tuition. I think Cleveland Clinic's like 5-year program is completely free. Kaiser's is free right now. There's, you know, I don't think we have the Geffen anymore, but we have some other scholarships here that are quite good. And like different schools, more schools are starting to have things like that. So look into them, try to, you know, see what you can do to maybe tailor your application if you can in some ways to like look better for those. And then just this idea that you can say no. And at any part of this process, you can kind of opt out. I think I applied to 28 schools. I don't even think I did the secondary for like 3 of them because then I just got down to doing them and I was like, maybe I don't want to go here. The mission isn't aligning, or maybe I like, there's other reasons that I don't think I'm going to be a good fit. It's cool to stop it there. If you have interviews for some places and then you end up getting an interview to a place that you don't love as much, or like you just find yourself not really feeling excited to go, you can say no. You don't have to take that interview. And I think for pre-meds where we're always like just happy that someone said yes to us at all, I think that we often forget that like Vishnu said, like this is our space, is our time, and there are some times where you don't have to give it away. You can just say no and opt out and trust that the other things that you have working out for you are still going to work out for you. And especially after you have acceptances, like it's okay to maybe say no to some other interviews or things if you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think my advice would be to be very organized. I think organization is very, very important for medical school admissions and life. So, you know, have a spreadsheet and have a system and keep everything up to date and have, you know, an order, like a dating scheme, and make sure everything is like really organized, because, you know, if you're planning like 33 schools or something, you know, it's going to be very confusing very fast. Have a standardized file naming scheme, use ISO 2701 for naming your files, right? Like you're going to really want to be super methodical about applying. That's my advice. I think that's the thing that got me through, especially if you're applying pretty broadly so that you can get in somewhere, just anywhere, right? Like, that's what I would say.
Your life will transition significantly in many more ways than one. Once you begin medical school, I think I had a different transition every single month, and I'm still transitioning throughout my first year of medical school. And so for all of the things that you currently really enjoy and ground you, I think those things are the things that you need to protect the most. So I'm slowly figuring out the ways in which I can incorporate all the things that mean a lot to me into my current life as a medical student. But there's so much about medical school that I couldn't have possibly predicted because the waiting game is as long as it is. I don't know when I'll make my final decision until I get to that moment. And even then that might change too. And so because of all of that, then I would figure out and hold closely the things that you currently have present in your life, because those things may look very different in your life once you begin school itself. And so I think that that's something that I want to continue to practice even as I'm starting medical or continuing medical school. Where I am now is holding on to the things that I care about the most, because I think that there's a lot that I might feel it's easier to let go of because of what I'm needing to prioritize right now. And I don't want to compromise on things I care about.
Is that everyone? Perfect. I think I just to kind of clear the air, because there's questions about GPA and MCAT and all these things and kind of tiering schools. Kind of just getting your guys' insight onto the importance of stats in terms of your well-being as a medical student, how you think that the stats and the qualities of those aspects really impacted your life once you got into medical school, would be really helpful. I guess it's a small pool since we're only asking UCLA medical students, but I think it's a good, important point to make.
Yeah, I mean, I can go. Like, I think it really depends on your specialty choice. There are more competitive specialties and there are less competitive specialties. If you want to know what those are, I believe AAMC collates data for applications and like, you know, how many spots there are, how many people applied, all that stuff. I'd recommend looking at that if you're interested in a specific specialty. I do believe it does matter if you're going to a more competitive specialty, what school you go to. I know I'm interested in urology. I don't know something about prostates, but it's quite a competitive specialty compared to others. And going to UCLA has definitely given me a leg up because, we have a lot of prostate research here, a lot of prostate, not prostate, but a lot of, prostate research, but also like urologists and a very good urology program and a lot of connections to other good urology programs. It's an enormous leg up when it comes to matching to residency. A leg up that I think is people don't, people kind of take for granted, like it's very, very large, especially as schools move away from, because step one's pass fail now. UCLA is a pass fail school, everything's pass fail, right? Like, how do you differentiate yourself kind of from other applicants? It's kind of moving towards, okay, your step 2 score, but also which school you went to. And that's becoming a bigger factor from what I've seen. And I think it definitely matters. So if you're going for one of those really top competitive specialties, school matters. And I think those schools that are up there, they care more about a lot of stats, a lot of research, because they're trying to they're trying to kind of fit what a top school looks like, right? So, value judgments aside, that's my take.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what everyone said. At the end of the day, you're gonna learn the same thing pretty much at every med school. I think, and I do think medicine compared to other specialties or other professional schools like law school or business school does actually have a little bit more of like a leeway in terms of like the tier of what you go to. Like I know with law, if you don't go like the top 20 law schools, you might as well not go. Same with business schools sometimes, but like that's not quite the same with medical school. Like especially with Rob said, if you are trying to go into a less competitive specialty, you can go anywhere and you will match and you will practice. And it's like really about what you put in at each med school is going to get you where you want to be. That's not to downplay ranking. It's not to downplay GPA and things like that. But honestly, unless you know exactly what competitive specialty you want to go to and your school just doesn't even have that department, like sometimes there's schools that don't have urology departments, don't have orthopedic departments. That is a lot less rare for like bread and butter things like pediatrics, OB-GYN, IM, things like that. But for those specialty ones, that can be the case, but it's still not impossible after that. There's many different ways you can get involved in research, many different ways you can find mentors. You might have to work a little bit harder while you're in med school to make that your reality, but I really don't think that where you start is indicative where you're going to end up. It just might make it a little bit easier of a path, but yeah.
With that note, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their wonderful insights with us and kind of participating in this conversation. If the panelists would like to, they can share their emails in the chat if people want to reach out to them and the panelists are willing to be receptive to that. Otherwise, I will be closing stopping the recording and ending the call now. Cool.